All right, Just fans, welcome back to another Cobham Crew. That's right. You've been asking, we've been waiting. We're here with Phil and Parth rocking the Cobham Crew update. I know it's in October. Phil, we usually do want to elaborate over the international break when things are quieter. We've had many matches to have been played, and so it is a good time to dig in while there's, to be quite honest, not much else going on.
For the first time this season, surely. It's never quiet at Chelsea, so trying to find an opportunity to get together to talk about everything that's going on at the academy, where, as we're going to discuss, things have been far from quiet over the last few months, is yeah, great opportunity to get back together, talk about the season so far, season as it's going to unfold, and a lot of changes that have been going on at Cobham over the last few months.
That's right. Parth, what about you? How has it been so far this season for you?
Yeah, really, really busy times for me. But we're still finding ways to watch as many matches as possible. And obviously, they've started to broadcast the matches, both 18s and 21s, recently for free, which has been really handy. So yeah, I'm hoping everyone has been tuning in, and if not, then you can listen to us talk about Cobham for the next half an hour or so.
There we go. So look, just to remind everybody, it was a huge summer of change. There's complete new academy leadership, which is honestly rippling effects throughout the academy football of England. And then we'll look at the season so far for both teams and maybe a little bit of a look ahead. So plenty to cover here as we get into it. And right away, jumping in, like there's a reason that we're starting with the academy leadership, because when Neil Bath and Jim Fraser depart after the tenure that they have had, Phil, not only are they kind of stalwarts within Chelsea, but like I said, the broader England youth development scene writ large.
Oh, for sure. Like, first things first, we're 3 months removed from the change, even though it was only a fortnight ago where the new hierarchy was officially confirmed and have started in, well, Glenn von der Kraan starting his role at that point. We'll get to the new names in a minute, but Neil and Jim changed English football, not just football at Chelsea, not just academy football. They changed English football. The Neil in particular was a driving force in the Elite Player Performance Plan, which came into effect in 2011 as the revision to the way that development pathways existed in England, how talent was going to be developed, how players were going to be educated as young people, just diversifying everything that went before it into a new era. And you've seen the effect that has had on young English talent, the England national team and the England national team age groups, but also beyond that, so many other countries, as we are in a globalized society where people have eligibility for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries, having started their careers in England or moved to England at young ages or so on and so forth. Myriad national teams have benefited from this. So I don't think it's overstating it to talk about their impact on a massive scale. But we can then contract it right back into what it felt like at Chelsea. And like I say, 3 months ago, a lot of dust has settled, but it's quite hard to believe in a lot of ways. Just 50 years combined service for the pair of them. Neil starting as a part-time junior coach in 1993, I think. Jim arriving from Swindon 2004. And they built a best-in-class operation that has unrivaled success in the modern era, both in terms of silverware accrued at academy level, players coming through into top flight senior football and into the Chelsea men's first team. And it was pretty unsavory the way that it went down. But everyone has little choice other than to move forward and to try to find optimism and reasons to be positive as we move into a new era, because there are plenty of reasons, as we're going to discuss.
Yeah, Parth, what did you want to touch on when it comes to Neil Bath and Jim Fraser departing and kind of any type of transition that you have seen?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of a shock and like not a shock. I think it's quite clear, sort of in this new ownership, you've seen they have wanted to get their own men in, and whichever story you hear about the reasons they left and stuff is what you can hear. But like, I think, yeah, some would have said it's been coming for a while. I think Neil Bath ideally and Jim Fraser would have happily stayed at the club and carried on sort of their success, which they've generated by themselves over the last 20 years, and obviously with the help of loads of others. But like Phil sort of said towards the end, I think you just have to accept it for what it was, and that you've got to look forward. And I think it's really important as Chelsea fans, and especially sort of us two and others who are so invested into the academy, that we do sort of give these new guys a chance. We need to understand that the foundations are still remaining, at least for now. And if they do make any drastic changes, that is going to only be sort of a, maybe only going to see those effects 5 to 10 years later. So for now, if we can continue to build on the foundations, which Neil Barth and Jim Fraser have, put very nicely for the new management team, then there's things to look forward to. But it's just going to have to be sort of a time will tell sort of thing.
Phil, is it as simple for us Chelsea fans that he can go to the England setup and we don't have to worry about him going to another domestic club?
Yes and no. So when you've been in one place for so long and then things go as they did very quickly, I think it's very important that the both of them take time away for the first time, pretty much in their senior professional careers, because it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job, 365. I don't think there's a time you'll come across Jim Fraser where he's not talking to somebody, either on the phone or in person. It's just a perpetual motion, organizer, mover of people. And it's so demanding that I think, aside from any contractual gardening leave, long periods of notice, however their departure was managed, once that's up, I think it'll be very interesting to see where they end up. I agree to an extent. Neil having such a close relationship with the Premier League and the FA would most likely end up in some sort of consultation, informal role, depending on what he wanted to do. Because he's a made man, he can pick his own job at this point, write his own job description, because he's one of one in terms of what he's done in English football and the wider game. Jim, obviously a bit younger, and knowing the person he is, strikes me as somebody who would want to be back in the thick of it. If he's going to go somewhere, it has to be the right fit, has to be the right opportunity for him. It was very, very painful for him to leave Chelsea in the circumstances that he did leave Chelsea. So I wouldn't expect anything in the short term or even the midterm. But both men are incredibly revered in the wider circle of football. So if and when they make it clear that they are happy to step back in, there will be a queue around the block for their services, and essentially write your own job description, because that really speaks to the quality of work that they've both demonstrated over such a prolonged period of time. Unrivaled, like, with all due respect to every other club in the country who do tremendous work in youth football, there are some revered names across the spectrum, but I don't think anyone comes close to what these two have been able to do. I'm very, very biased, of course, but I think when that news broke in early July, it was almost unanimous in terms of the respect and the shock, the events that had unfolded.
Yeah, Parth, I mean, how do you kind of see this playing out potentially one way or the other?
Yeah, I think, like Phil said, it's probably what they will end up in some sort of consultation, or whether it's with the FA or Premier League. And clubs have previously sort of gone for them, especially sort of under this new ownership in the past, and they, continue. We're happy at Chelsea, and we'll continue happy to stay here. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll still be a while before we see them back in work. But if a club did manage to pick them up, then I think they would have two very, very, very good and talented people who know exactly what they're doing. And it wasn't just it wasn't a Chelsea specific thing. Obviously, there are other dynamics in the sort of Cobham area and everything around that, and the staff and everything, which would have helped to their success. But these are two guys who are very, very good at management. They know what they're doing. They know how to run an academy, and they know how to build it up from scratch. So they'll be absolutely fine in that sense, and any club would dream of having them. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next few months and years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part about this all, is that it moves so quick. And like I think when the owners took over, they even talked about, like Neil Bath, especially, is like a strategic advantage. He was elevated, and look, they made a decision. He backed his boy Jim, and that's what true leadership looks like. And unfortunately, I think that they decided that this different approach, unfortunately, is what they want to go with. And you have to sometimes wonder if, like, there are key people, like, irreplaceable in that sense, and the outcomes that you've gotten from it are outsized in proportion to the results that you're probably going to get anywhere else. So we'll see how it shakes up, because we are going to talk about the new leadership, how it's going, but we're going to take our first ad breaks when we get back, all about the new crew. All right, so to your point, we do have new leadership running Cobham. You've got Glenn Vanderkran and Jack Francis. Phil, what's the setup here? Obviously, before we knew it was Neil Bath, Jim Fraser. They had different titles, very specific set of roles. How is the new hierarchy in the academy working?
On the face of it, somewhat similarly, although there's a shift in terms of priorities. So, to the point that yourself and Parth just made, in terms of the Cobham that Neil built still exists in the majority, and that's the true legacy and the first thing that he would point to. It feels very weird speaking almost on his behalf, because it's not. And as he was notoriously somebody who wouldn't like to celebrate himself and celebrate the collective and the importance of delegation and trusting people to deliver excellence in every job capacity. And so that's the true legacy, first and foremost, of what Glenn and Jack are inheriting in their new leadership. The majority of people are still there and are determined to drive forward, with Chelsea still being the best in class at what they do. Jim would have always been seen as recruitment heavy, personality heavy, and then the coaching curriculum is spread across multiple personnel from Neil down, of course, because this is the way that academy football works. But in the new structure, Glenn van der Kraan arrives as academy technical director, and Jack Francis is the football operations director. So you now split the responsibilities in two different ways. Glenn looking after the technical side of the curriculum and determining the style of football, the technical approach across everything, and Jack being more responsible for the personal side, the contracts, the recruitment, the people, the player care, all of that stuff, which is a massive role in itself. So it's a slightly more traditional, organized approach that you'd find in the majority of English academies now, which, again, more tightly aligns with what the EPPP and the Premier League would like you to do. Chelsea have always been a little bit more bespoke under Neil and Jim's leadership, with tremendous results, obviously. But when you're trying to reorganize and rebuild a new structure after them, you're going to lean towards the way that everybody else does it, for obvious reasons. So if you think about it in that way, Glenn would look after the football curriculum, Jack looks after the people, and that's the way we'll move forward. But it's very important to note that they've got equal position in that hierarchy. They are a co-leadership, not one above the other. It was presented as such by the club in those terms, and that's the way it's going to be operating, at least in the short term. But okay. I haven't heard or have any reason to think that that's not going to be the case for long term either.
Guys, I've detected a pattern. We have co-owners, co-sporting directors, co-Cobham directors. I'm surprised we don't have co-coaches, if I'm being honest with you.
Give it time.
What is this? And and it's not their fault. Like, this goes right to the top on approach and strategy. So I'm just like, most successful orgs end up having one person responsible calling the shots. Like, I get they have different roles and responsibilities, but if it's going to go to a 50-50 split every single time, a bit goofy. Parth, I'm not going to push you with the crystal ball or anything here and kind of, quarterback this. But what my question for you is, what do you think a realistic timeline is for Glenn and Jack to make their mark within the structure that exists? Is that 1 season, 2, 3? Kind of like, what are you envisioning is your best guess?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because realistically, the answer is, if they can continue to do sort of what's been done the last 20 years, then they've absolutely, stepped down their mark, and they would have been doing an incredibly successful job. But to answer your question properly, like, you can already see some changes being made. I think just in general, the philosophy and the way things are going about, whether that's from Van der Kran's side or Jack Francis or whatever, it's just a group decision. But for example, just sort of two things which come to the top of my head. The first being, like, I think you're going to see a push towards the players who perhaps the club back a bit more for whatever reason. I think the biggest example of that is someone like Shimeuka, who's starting a lot of under-21s games this season, and we can get onto him later maybe. But I don't think that perhaps would have been done in previous seasons whilst there were still strikers ahead and whilst Shim is available for the under-18s. The club clearly do back Shim a lot, and they're giving him game time. And I think maybe that's a sort of change which you're going to see happen with other players as the years come. And then secondly, this is all really hypothetical, but it will be interesting that if Glenn van der Kran, he sort of has taken the footballing side of things, and he was at Man City for 4 years before joining Chelsea. He was the head of coaching of the under-19s to the under-14s, and obviously City have a top academy. They've produced some top players. They've produced Chelsea's current player, Chelsea's first team's best player by a country mile. But, has it been close to Cobham in terms of production over the last 15, 20 years? I don't know. So have sort of City's players been able to adapt to sort of overall conditions in other leagues and other clubs as well as Chelsea's has? I don't think so. So it'll be really interesting to see if he does try and influence what he's done at City into Chelsea, or whether he's going to look to adapt his own ways, his own sort of mannerisms at, Cobham, which has been such a success for the last 15, 20 years. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think you're already seeing changes now. I think if you want to see sort of long-term changes and anything which could happen, which changes the work which Neil and Jim did, you're going to have to probably wait around 3 to 4 seasons, if not longer.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, well, let's kind of talk about, like, the dust is settling a little bit. Phil, how are you feeling this? Let's just call it the transition, right? Because I get so worried about putting things at people's feet right now, right? When you do have such significant transition. So look, it could be, because there's the players involved, there's the staff, there's the support staff, obviously there's the co-directors. In general, few months into the season, how are you feeling things stand at the academy?
I think it's very much a work in progress, and mostly it sounds like a cop out of an answer, but Glenn's only been in his role officially for uh, a week now.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we're going to see the substance of what's to come. The most interesting thing for me is that across the club, across the men's first team, the women's first team, and now the academy, with an asterisk on the academy, as I'm going to discuss, the ownership change has basically seen a complete overhaul of everything that they inherited over 2 and a bit years. So on the women's side, I think Paul Green's the only one left now from the old management structure.
Mm-hmm.
On the men's side, the entire coaching staff and medical team, recruitment team has been radically overhauled. And now the academy's followed suit, with an asterisk that Jack is in place with even more responsibility than he had before, on a journey that is the prototype example of what a Neil Barth developed academy academy personnel would look like. He was a former academy player who returned in various capacities and rose through the player care team. As I've discussed plenty of times on this podcast and on social media, the player care team at Chelsea do excellent work. And he went through that and was mentored closely by Neil into a position so that when Neil was given that extra responsibility into director of football operations quite early on in the Clear Lake era, and then Jim became head of youth development, Jack became academy manager for under 9 to under 16. So now he's elevated again. So you've still got a real core presence of the old being put into a position of senior responsibility in the academy now, in a way that hasn't existed so much on the men's or women's side. And whether that will erode over time or whether that will remain a strong pillar is what I'm really looking at. It's too early to say. It's promising because Jack's been running the show since this all went down in early July. Now Glenn is there. They're going to work out what their relationship looks like. They're going to work out what responsibilities look like. And it really is a wait and see. I'm cautiously optimistic for the reasons that I've kind of hinted at already, that throughout the academy structure, key figures still remain in place. Darren Grace, head of local recruitment for the younger age groups, still in place with the responsibility. Ben Knight, promoted to Jack Zoe's role of academy manager now, having been hugely influential in the games program and the younger age groups under 9 to under 14s, which is the same sort of age group that Glenn was working at Man City for the last 4 years. He was at Feyenoord before that as their academy director. Feyenoord have a fabled academy, so he comes in with an incredible resume in his own right to mesh with everything that Chelsea have built over the last 20 years. There are key people still in place, and as long as their morale is high, as long as they're given the freedom and flexibility to do their work, empowered by somebody like Jack, who has been a trusted colleague, friend, teammate for most of the last 15 years, then there's little reason to think that we can't still be very excited about the direction of the academy, in spite of the bitter taste it left in the way that Neil and Jim departed. You kind of do have to move on from that eventually. Everyone in the building understands that as well. There's obviously an incredible loyalty to the people that helped them along their way, but now you're in a new era. So as much as it does sound like a cop out of wait and see, we are only a week into this official new structure. But whereas I'm not very positive or optimistic as a rule about most things across Chelsea, I always have been about the academy, so I will remain so.
Fair enough. And Parth, what about you? How's progress so far?
Yeah, again, like has been difficult to say. It's sort of only been weeks or few months, but I say things are still sort of going well in terms of recruitment, in terms of results, which we'll get onto. The under 18s have started to perform really well. The under 21s are looking pretty strong as well. So I think it's just a matter of time, and I think you'd have to do something ridiculously wrong to really muck up what sort of Neil and Jim have left in the last 15 to 20 years. So it's going to be an interesting time for sure.
All right, let's not challenge ourselves to do something stupid now, Parth. You just never know; they might meet your expectations. But hey, we're gonna take our last ad break. When we get back, all about the results so far. We've had the big build up. Now it's time to get into the wins and losses. Thank you to the sponsors. We'll be right back. All right, so season so far. Let's kick it off with the dev squad. They have the new manager, Felipe Coelho. Is my Portuguese? Yeah,
I think that's absolutely spot on, especially with the Felipe. It's Felipe, not Felipe, because he's Portuguese, so absolutely spot on.
Get in. All right. Well, I'm gonna minimize the rest of my pronunciations because I can't do better than that. Phil, to your point, results have been mixed, generally improving. Love the most recent West London thrashing of Fulham 6-0, but it was off to a bit of a rocky start. So let's go ahead and talk through the big thing I think with this, right, is not only results, but also like the squad. How much has the squad changed from last season to this season, obviously with the new coaching staff?
It's been considerable. So last year we had the under-18s reach the national final, finished runners-up against Manchester United. So that age group, the majority of it, graduate into this level. I think it was something like 14 scholars. So many of them had already sort of stepped up a little bit a year early, as you tend to do. But they've all become full-time this year. So it's a really young group, added to by the likes of Shimaoka, as Parth said, coming up as a 16-year-old. But they've also got some experience because, as we saw at the end of the summer transfer window, not everybody got the move, loan or permanent, that they were looking for. So the dev squad have been able to enjoy the considerable talents of Alex Matos and Harvey Vale for the first half of the season. And quite frankly, they are the two best players in the PL2 by a laughable distance, as they should be. And it started to show a little bit more recently because the team's taken some time to find itself, both as a group, but also under the change of style that Philippe's been looking for. Mark Robinson had a very clear style that worked for the team. They were very successful with it. Philippe hasn't massively changed that. There's some tweaks around the edges because, as we've spoken about before, Chelsea have a prescribed and preferred style of play throughout the academy, which is subject to change with everything we've just spoken about. But every manager of every, or head lead coach of each age group gets to put their own personal spin on it. And Philippe has his own influences, having been very successful in his academy career at Benfica and at Estoril, both in Portugal. So there was a little bit of a hiccup at the start. The Leipzig defeat in the International Cup in late August was a comedy of errors of a game, 6 goals, and I think every one of them was avoidable from the sort of mistakes that you say academy football is there for, but as long as you don't repeat them. And to their credit, they haven't really been repeating them. They've won 5 of 7 since. Sometimes the games have resembled basketball matches, back and forth, chances at both ends, very open. Philippe will point out that Chelsea have had the most shots at goal in PL2 this season. It's a case of trying to find more clinical finishing, a cutting edge, and they certainly did that at Fulham last time out with a massive 6-0 win that I'll let Parth talk about more.
Run it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, 6-0 win was a really, really good second half, at least. I think the first half was sort of that end-to-end style. Fulham could have easily probably gone 1 or 2-0 up. We probably could have gone 1 or 2-0 up. And, going in at half-time at 0-0, you're like, where's this going to go? But second half, we just absolutely turned it on. 6 goals, everyone popped in, from Donnell McNeely to David Washington to Jimmy J. Morgan to Shin Mayuka. So it was all really, really impressive, that second half. And I think I said it a few sort of games ago on the Twitter timeline, that I think this team and squad is just waiting for it to click, and hopefully we're starting to see that. And the experience of Harvey Veda and Alex Matos, and obviously you don't want them playing PL2 football, but what they do is they give that experience. They really just increase sort of the level, and it's so good from both of them that they haven't let their head sort of drop down after failing to get a move, and are happy to put in their best shifts out week in, week out for the under-21s. And I think we saw that especially in the EFL Trophy game against Bromley. There was so much fight and quality against a very good League Two side, and it's a trophy where you don't really know what can happen in these group stage games, but we did incredibly well, and I think it's encouraging for what we're going to see in the rest of that competition. But yeah, I think overall, the last few games have been really, really positive. I think we have so much attacking talent in this squad, that if the midfield and defence are on it, then like it was against Fulham, where even if you're 0-0, they're so confident that the attackers are going to create something and score. So it's all really encouraging. The midfielders, I think, have been outstanding, whether it's from Keanu Dyer to McMahon to Reece Russell-Denny when he's played, and others as well. So yeah, I think I've been really impressed with everything. There definitely is a different style of play. There's a lot of more sort of, I don't want to say playing out the back as such, but like Mark Robinson was really happy to go over the top a lot more, and he was a lot more versatile. Philippe seems very stuck on his 4-3-3. And whether that is beneficial for the boys is what we're going to have to see in terms of their development. But yeah, I think overall I've been quite impressed with the under-21s, with Philippe as well, and yeah, I'm excited to see what the squad can do until January.
Okay, loaded question. Feel free to deflect. Phil, are you surprised that we haven't seen Harvey Villa or Alex Matos really around the first team getting minutes? Mainly Akampong and Tyrique George involved.
Surprised? No. Disappointed? Yes. The Conference League is the sort of competition that these two should absolutely be involved in, and I recognise that Matos would need to take a registration spot on the A list. Harvey certainly wouldn't. He could be registered at any point on the B list. He only turned, is it 21 or 22? 21. He's 2003 born, so he turned 21 in September. So he's in his under 21 season. Doesn't need to be on the A list. He could be added to B list at any point. And the only argument you could give against it is that he might be cup tied if he moves to another Conference League team in January, which isn't a factor I would let influence the decision. We saw him play half a dozen games under Thomas Tuchel during the COVID seasons, and I would like. It sounds damning by fate praise to say he didn't let anybody down, but he didn't, which is firstly impressive enough. But he did beyond that. He was influential. He played well, and he can play in a number of positions. He's got quality. He's got a season of senior football under his belt, and like 4,000 plus minutes at that. So his body is adapted to playing regular men's football now. Matos went into the Championship last season at Huddersfield like a wrecking ball. Obviously has some work to do to figure out how he's not going to get 15 yellow cards a season in the men's game. But that's what makes him stand out. Him and Keanu Dyer have had such a tremendous partnership in central midfield when they've played together, because they understand each other's game. Alex lets Keanu go off and do everything, and he polices space behind him. And it's kind of, this doesn't discredit Keanu, because he's arguably been arguably been the player of the season so far for the dev squad. If Keanu's getting opportunities with the men's first team and on the bench, and hopefully soon a debut, then Alex should be right there with him because they've been really, really good. I'm not surprised because the way that the squad seems to be organised and managed now is this is the group. Tyrique and Josh are on the periphery and Keanu's joined them. But the older ones who were inherited seem to be on the way out. And they both had moves lined up, multiple moves lined up at the end of August that didn't happen for administrative reasons or time related reasons or whatever you want. So I'm not surprised that they're not involved. I'm very disappointed that they're not involved because I think they would both add quality to an already capable men's first team group.
Parth, two names, and again, not to steal the spotlight from the players who are that Phil just listed, but I think a lot of people are going to wonder what's going on with Omari Kellyman and Dwan Richards. Obviously, Omari being a relatively big ticket signing this summer, especially as we were letting so many other Cobham players go. And the big question from Matt Law is where's he going to fit?
Yeah, both are currently injured. I think Omari Kellyman will be back in the next few weeks or month or so. He's doing his recovery, and I think Jujuan Richards will be a little bit longer. I think he did his ACL or something like that. He had a really bad knee injury, had surgery, so I think he's still going to be a while. But yeah, it's a good point. Where will Omari Kellyman sort of fit in when he comes back? Because the way the sort of front four, you can almost call it now, of Tyrique George, Harvey Vale, Donnell McNeely, and Shimaika have been performing. I'm not sure really Amari gets in that team over any of them. And that's obviously Amari is still a very good player. And obviously there are so many minutes in sort of under 21s football, so he is going to get minutes. But I think if you had a final or something, I'm not sure he would get into the starting lineup. And he has this really interesting profile. He's this really, really tall midfielder. And that obviously offers a lot to his game. He's got a really nice left foot, strikes the ball really well, can drive with it. But again, if you're looking towards the midfield sort of role, Alex Matos and Kiana Dye have been a really strong partnership. So obviously there will be minutes. Maybe you can look to sending him out on loan in January. I think if he came back in the next sort of few weeks, that would be fine if you got consistent game time until January. But if you say he comes back in late November or December, then I think perhaps that'd be a bit too much of a risk, and you're probably best sending off someone like Harvey Vale, or giving out minutes to Jimmy J Morgan and David Washington, who are still very much around and also pushing for minutes. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of attacking talent. So he's definitely going to have to wait for his chances, but he'll get them. So it's just about taking them and impressing.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and flip over to the 18s. Again, also a slow start. You've got Suleiman still leading the charge there. So Phil, a run of 3 consecutive wins maybe is a good turn of the tides. But again, I'm assuming there's even more change with this team, naturally. So kind
Oh
of
yeah,
level set us with this group.
yeah. So this, as we've discussed before, the 18s welcome a bunch of first-year scholars every summer. It was 9 or 10 of them this year off my head. I lose count of exactly how many. But beyond that, it's the youngest group in the under-18 Premier League this season. 8 of the under-16s who are a very successful group in their own right across age group, winning domestic and international silverware from under-12s onwards. Pretty much every season they won the domestic treble last season. So they've got a lot of promise within them, and a lot of them have stepped up early and often into this group. And we'll talk about specifics because a bunch of them have scored goals already. But just as a big high level thing, the results aren't necessarily reflective of the performances in every game. So they started with a 5-2 defeat to Brighton. And I said to a couple of people afterwards, when you look back at that result, because it was the opening day of the season, when you look back at that in January or March or at the end of the season, I think it'll be looked upon as Brighton are a really good team this year rather than Chelsea were out of sorts, not good enough. Because Brighton are very good. Brighton are very physically good. And Chelsea were still sort of finding who they were on that opening day. They went to Arsenal a week later and they lost 1-0, having been down to 10 men for 75 minutes. And they deserved at least a draw out of that game. There was some very cynical play from Arsenal to retain a narrow 1-0 win, even though they had a player advantage. That sounds bitter, but that's exactly how it was. And then they started to find their feet. They got the result. They squeaked a win against Stoke 3-2. They didn't play well in that one, but they got the win. And then they've won 3 of the next 4. They got beat 5-2 at home by Leicester, but Leicester scored 3 of those goals quite late. They got one. Chelsea poured forward trying to get an equaliser, and you give up goals. Doesn't matter if you lose 3-2 or 5-2 in those circumstances. And to that point, they've been then beat Villa, West Ham, and Newcastle quite comprehensively. At times, without playing that well, the Newcastle result flattered them a bit. 4-1, they had a lot of chances, but they didn't play that well, and Newcastle missed a bunch of chances. So the results are what they are. It's 4 wins, 3 defeats, but you've seen the evolution of how they're playing, how they're connecting together, the relationships they're building in certain parts of the team. So you see Landon Emanalo and Ollie Harrison building a good partnership as a distinct 2 in a more of a 4-2-3-1, and the 3 ahead of them, whichever players they may be, are very fluid. Sometimes they're 3 central number 10s with the width provided by the fullback. Sometimes you spread out a little bit. Sometimes you have a focal 9 to play off. Sometimes you don't. And it's worth noting they've missed quite a few of their more experienced second years through injury or other reasons. Someone like Sean Wade hasn't played at all this season. Genesis Antwi missed the first few games injured. Kai Crampton hasn't been playing in goal as regularly, so they've had the first year boys, Jack Austin, who's now injured, and Hudson Sands playing. So it's a very young group that's finding its way. But recent results and performances have been more encouraging than if we'd have had this conversation at the end of August.
Love that. Positive trends on both sides. Parth, you talked about Shimweka, and Phil just touched on Landon Emanalo, which I am interested, one, because of his father's connection to the club. Michael Emanalo, for those of you not connecting it, but then also he is on the U.S. Youth National Team setup. So very selfish on how that's going for him. But like with Mweka, unless I've forgotten, I don't know how much he was on everyone's radar leading up to this. Is he having a breakout season?
Yeah, I think with Shim, it's an interesting one. It even hit me a few weeks ago that he's actually a first year scholar, which is pretty mind blowing because we've seen him play a lot of 18s football last season. I think until now we sort of you you wanted to just stay quiet on him, just let him develop and do his thing, and especially while he was a 15-year-old. But as he's sort of become a scholar, and games are starting to be broadcasted, and everyone is talking about him rightly or wrongly, and he's been doing very, very well. He's been scoring goals. He's been on the turn, looking incredible. He's in pre-season against sort of League One and League Two sides, he was absolutely outstanding, and he was against Bromley as well in the EFL Trophy. So yeah, he's definitely having a sort of a big season, and you're not probably going to get 3 to 4 goals from him every single game. Although I think if you played him regularly in the under 18s football, you probably could. You're going to get a lot more very other good, interesting play. He can play in the 10 as well. He still wins headers despite not being the absolute tallest. So there's a lot from him. And then on Landon, yeah, I think Landon I've been really, really impressed with. He's this left-footed midfielder who does all the sort of deep technical work really, really well, but he reads the game so well as well. He makes so many good interception and blocks. He started to add goals and assists to his games in the last few weeks. So yeah, I've been really impressed with Landon. I've been really impressed with Shim, who's not played much 18s. But just in general as well, the whole squad, we've had so many of the under 16s sort of come up and impress. And I think that's been so good for Haas, and it's a credit to Haas as well, that he's willing to give these boys chances, and he didn't sort of emphasize the need sort of recruitment, of trying to sign 4 to 5 other sort of first year scholars from other clubs like we saw with Ollie Harrison last year. It was, whether it was intentional or not, it was let's trust these under 16s who are an age group who I'm sure everyone is really excited about. And 3 or 4 have become regular starters, and a couple others are really pushing into the team and impressing. So yeah, it's really exciting times, I think, for the under 18s who, despite not being the most experienced, are looking really good, and who actually knows what could happen with this team.
I just want to provide a bit more context on Mayoka, for listeners who may not be familiar with him. He has routinely played up the age groups before even joining Chelsea. He's been at Chelsea. He's now in the early part of his 3rd season here. He joined at the end of his under 14 season at Brighton. He'll have been at Chelsea's attention plenty before that, but there was an under 17 cup game in 2000 and 20, I believe. He was 13, a month shy of his 14th birthday, and playing for the under-17s as Brighton won at Chelsea in that competition, scored twice and ran riot. And probably no coincidence that Chelsea went out and signed him at the end of the season, because in the following group game, Tyler Dibbling did quite similar for Southampton, and Chelsea went out and signed him before the move was reversed for personal reasons. But Shim's been at Chelsea as an under-15 and under-16, playing up at under-18 level. He was playing under-18 for Brighton at under-14. So when Parth says we've sort of been reluctant to talk about it because he's so young and now he's officially a scholar, he's already playing under-21 football, it's the right opportunity that the club have put him into these advanced age groups, and you can start to begin to get excited and to celebrate. And it's not just the club doing it. This international break, he's joined the England under-19 age group. He skipped an age group, and he's the only other players in that squad off my head who've done the same are Ethan Nwaneri and Mikey Moore of Arsenal and Tottenham respectively, and both of those boys have played senior men's minutes for their first teams this season, which puts Shim into fairly illustrious company. That while you're not necessarily saying talent is like for like, if those boys are getting opportunities at that level, Shim could consider himself in the same conversation, being several months and an age group younger, because while they're all 2007 borns, he's late 2007. The others before August, so they're in a year above, as we categorize things in English footballs and in English schools. So yeah, still scandalously young, doesn't turn 17 until a few days after this episode goes out, and is making not just under-21s football look quite easy for him, but playing against senior opponents in competitions like the EFL Trophy, like Bromley, Charlton at the end of this month, Cambridge to come. Now, yeah, you can rightly be excited about watching him as well as everyone else, but yeah.
Fair enough. And that is wild, because I was looking at that and I saw he was with the 19s, and I was like, oh wait, he's still young. But that's great progress, which just goes to show you there's a ton of exciting stuff going on in the academy. As you guys have mentioned, more and more games are being streamed. The accessibility is starting to go up. Get back involved. I think that the club are going to look at those numbers. The more people watching, the more they're going to continue to invest resources there. Phil, if somebody is trying to find out if they could watch a youth match, where do you think they could go?
I think they could find it on Twitter or X or Instagram and I was going to say any other social media platform, but if you want to use TikTok, you probably have to find Parth because I'm not on there. I will say before we point this out that for every game that is broadcast live, you'll find it on my Twitter timeline at Chelsea Youth. Parth will have information as well on his, and it will be regularly shared. You shouldn't have to work hard to find it. Chelsea are also increasingly good at making this clear. They've got match day information on the morning of the under-21 match days. The link, the information is always on the website. There's plenty of coverage, an increased amount of academy coverage, written and video on the website. So make sure you keep your eyes on there. And I mean, fair play to the club. We've talked on here a few times over the last year or so about how disappointed we are in the lack of coverage. And while it's easy to say, well, this is what they should be doing, let's not credit them. They deserve credit for putting it on. But they also deserve credit for just showing the under-18 games with no commentary, in a roundabout way. So a lot of clubs would say, no, we need to invest in a proper commentator and co-commentator and a proper broadcast, multi-camera, all of this stuff, which in an ideal world you would do. And Chelsea have done very successfully for most of the 2010s, for example. And hopefully they'll get back to that, because some of the commentators that they've used are iconic voices in Chelsea TV law: Ben Andrews, Matt Davies-Adams, good friends of ours. But for the time being willing to go forward and just say, yeah, we'll put the game on as a broadcast in its simplest form so that people can watch it wherever they are. It's not geo-locked. It's available on YouTube as well. They're increasing accessibility. So that's fair. That's appropriate to say thank you for that. And hopefully it's a sign that they're willing to see how it goes and to invest greater resourcing into the presentation as we move forward. But to answer your original question, yeah, find it on our social feeds. Any given match day, you shouldn't have to look far to find it.
Yeah, that was me queuing you up, because you do such a good job promoting it, yet people still somehow miss it. So shouting that out. Yeah, and Parth on TikTok for updates clearly is what I got out of this, which is important.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll create it after this episode, but no TikTok for me for now.
Maybe I was mistaken. I thought you were on there.
No,
All
thank God
good.
not.
It's far too young for me, old man, both spiritually and literally.
Hey, Parth, what is the next big match you're looking forward to for the Dev Squad as we look ahead before the next international break?
Ooh, I think there is always one match every single year which I keep an eye on, and that is Chelsea Arsenal. And Chelsea Arsenal at an academy level is always perhaps the one match where any sort of philosophy of it doesn't matter about the result sort of goes out of the window, and you quite literally do anything to get the 3 points. So that's one which is definitely in my calendar. It's actually on Diwali, so it'll be a perfect day for me as well. Hopefully a double celebration. But yeah, I think definitely the EFL Trophy game as well against Charlton and Cambridge are ones to keep an eye on, because who knows what this squad could do if they were to get out of the group stages. Chelsea have always done pretty well in the EFL Trophy, but not really reached sort of the semi-final stages and onwards. Whether this squad could do it, I have I have a few promising thoughts about that if we were to get out the group stages. So yeah, definitely keeping an eye on those 2 to 3 games.
All right. And Phil, your 18 spotlight game?
Probably the 2 away games, Southampton at the end of October and Norwich early November, because so far Chelsea haven't left London for a fixture. I say like Arsenal's technically not in London, but it's not exactly a long trip. It's just on the edge of the M25. They've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 home games and 2 away games at Arsenal and West Ham. And even in the under-17 Cup, they were at Arsenal and at home to Charlton. So they haven't had to go further afield yet. I want to see, not that Southampton and Norwich are particularly far away. Southampton is like an hour from Cobham. Norwich is a 4-hour drive each way from Cobham. So I want to see how they get on the road with some of those longer trips and how they deal with the additional lack of comfort that you get at home. They've got Reading and they've got Fulham at home. Fulham will be a challenge as well, because twice in the last few years they've come to Cobham and given us a hiding with, I think, a 7-1 and a 6-2 or something like that. They've had the better of us over the last few years, and you kind of want to bring that back in our favour, like the 21s did when it's 6-0 at Fulham the other day. But yeah, because they've had such a localised, a home-heavy slate so far, I'm interested to see how they do going on some longer trips, because the back half of the season is going to be loaded a bit more with them by comparison. And if you're looking to win things, you've got to go and win on the road as well.
As a good father, no favorites. They're all his favorite. And that's exactly what we come to love about Phil. He found a way to highlight every single match, which is great. There's no wrong answer. I appreciate you.
I'm playing both sides so that I can always win.
I love it. All right. Well, look, we're going to wrap here. Thank you so much, Phil, Parth, the Double Ps. We are back with a very in-depth. Thank you for taking your time and walking through the Neil Bath, uh, you know, transition process, the situation as it was to today, and now the matches. We're so excited to see more young players starting to get involved around the academy with the first team, because look, anytime you get a new manager, you never know how long that road from the first team to the academy building is. And with Maresca, let's just say it's not underwater like it was with Maurizio Sarri, right? There's hope, which is what we all love. So anyways, until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.